It began not with conquest, but with a horse, not just any horse, but a breed so powerful, so swift, that one man's description of it would inspire an empire to change course. In 138 BC, when a Chinese envoy named Zhang Qian returned from the west, he spoke not of gold, nor of gods, nor of glory, but of a creature. The horses of Dayuan, he said, were unlike anything China had ever bred. They could gallop for days, pull chariots through deserts, and strike fear into the heart of any enemy. Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty listened and decided, then and there, to reach across the unknown for them. And that was the beginning of everything: trade, war, diplomacy, disease, invention. The ancient Silk Road was not a single path, but a sprawling web of civilizations and ambition, 4,000 miles of dust and desire, linking the Han Dynasty with Rome, the Persian heartlands with the Tang courts, and perhaps most remarkably knitting together ideas from Buddhism to gunpowder. It was not built with stone, but with willpower, and it changed the world more profoundly than most wars. But how did a single emperor's obsession with horses birth the most important trade network in ancient history? And why centuries later did it vanish, leaving only its ghost behind? Let us return to the 2nd century, before the Common Era. China, under the Han Dynasty, had grown strong after a period of civil war and fragmentation. Its borders stretched across fertile plains and mountainous frontiers, but at its northern edge loomed a constant threat. The Xiongnu, these nomadic tribes raided the frontier, challenged imperial control, and forced Chinese emperors to divert troops, resources, and attention away from expansion. Emperor Wu, often regarded as one of the most ambitious rulers of the Han, knew the Xiongnu problem could not be solved with swords alone. He needed alliances. He needed intelligence. And so, in 138 BC, he chose a man, Zhang Qian, and sent him west. Qian's mission was straightforward in design, but revolutionary in scope. Reach the Yuezhi tribes, former enemies of the Xiongnu, and see if they would ally with the Han. But the journey was treacherous. Qian was captured, imprisoned for over a decade, and only escaped to continue westward. When he finally returned to China more than 13 years after he had left, he did not bring an alliance. He brought vision. Zhang Qian spoke of lands filled with strange crops and animals, with spices and fabrics unknown in China. Among the cities he described, Dayuan stood out, a Greco-Bactrian region in what is now the Fergana Valley of modern Uzbekistan. The people there had inherited elements of Hellenistic culture, remnants of Alexander the Great's campaigns, and bred the horses Qian so admired tall, muscular, and resilient, capable of bleeding from the skin after long races, earning them the nickname Heavenly Horses. Emperor Wu was captivated. He launched military campaigns to seize these horses, even engaging in open conflict with Dayuan. The Han suffered defeats, then regrouped, returned, and finally forced Dayuan to submit. China got its horses, and with them came the desire for more. Silk had long been a treasured commodity within China. Lightweight, durable, shimmering with color, it had become synonymous with nobility and refinement. But now, with newfound awareness of Western kingdoms and the possibility of long-distance trade, silk could become something greater, a currency of empire. By 130 BC, Emperor Wu formalized trade routes that would become the Silk Road, a network not of paved roads, but of mountain trails, desert paths, river crossings, and merchant hubs. The Chinese sent silk west. In return came horses, yada spices, glassware, and ideas, and so the network grew link by link, merchant by merchant, caravan by caravan. This was not the first long-distance road. Of course, 3 centuries earlier, the Persian Empire had constructed its royal road stretching from Susa in modern-day Iran to Sardis, near the Aegean. Herodotus described its courier system as unrivaled in speed and endurance. It connected the empire, but the Silk Road would connect the world from China to Central Asia, to Persia, to Syria, to the gates of Rome. A journey that took years, a journey few made in full, but it worked because the world was hungry. Hungry for silk, for trade, for power. The obsession spread westward fast. In Rome, by the time of the late Republic and early Empire, silk became the most desired commodity in fashion and interior design. Vome for it, senators despised it, not just for its expense, but for its revealing nature. The moralists of Rome protested the immorality of transparent silk garments, yet the demand only surged. By the time of the 1st century, the Roman elite were paying extraordinary sums, sometimes their own weight in gold for bolts of Chinese silk. But this came at a cost. Rome had little that China wanted in return. So the empire exported gold and silver, draining its own treasury to fund the insatiable demand. The Chinese, under strict imperial controls, limited their imports. The balance of trade was completely skewed, and by the 2nd century AD, Rome was in what we would now call a trade deficit. The West was addicted, and the East, controlling the supply, held all the power, even as Rome fell in the West. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, faced the same problem. Silk was still coming from China, still at high cost, still guarded like a national secret. But now, in the 6th century, a new emperor came to power, Justinian I. He had no intention of letting the East be bled dry by a thread, so he made a plan. Justinian sent 2 Nestorian monks, disguised as pilgrims, deep into China. Their mission: to smuggle silkworm eggs and the secrets of sericulture, the breeding of silkworms and the cultivation of mulberry leaves. The plan worked. The monks returned with the means to break China's monopoly. Byzantium began producing its own silk, and the tide of trade began to shift. Still, the road remained active not just for silk, but for spices, perfumes, ceramics, yada, bronze, lacquerware, and medicine. In the other direction came glass, wine, wool, coral, amber, precious stones, and ideas. Buddhism, carried from India, found fertile ground in China. Nestorian Christianity traveled east. Islam spread west and east alike. Carried by traders and preachers, culture flowed, art changed, languages adapted, and though few traveled the entire route, every stop became a node in a web of global exchange. And yet, perhaps most curiously, the man most famous for traversing this road was not a conqueror or merchant. He was a teenager from Venice. In the year 1271, a 17-year-old boy stood beside his father and uncle in the city of Acre. On the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, his name was Marco Polo. His father, Niccolo Polo, and Uncle Maffeo had already been to the Mongol Empire once and had returned with an invitation from none other than Kublai Khan himself, the grandson of Genghis Khan and ruler of the vast Han Dynasty stretching across China. Now, young Marco was to accompany them on their return journey, a trek across the Silk Road that would take them 3 years. They passed through Armenia, Persia, the Pamir Mountains, the Taklamakan Desert, the Gobi Desert, places that sounded mythical to European ears. Along the way, they witnessed Buddhist monasteries, Muslim cities, ancient caravanserais buzzing with languages from Greek to Persian to Uyghur. They crossed the Oxus River, faced snowstorms and sandstorms alike, and finally arrived at the court of Kublai Khan in 1275. What awaited them was not a backwater kingdom, but a dazzling empire of order, opulence, and complexity. Polo would later describe cities with population numbers dwarfing those of Europe. He marveled at Chinese paper money, canal networks, and fire-powered weapons. He observed Confucian scholars, Taoist mystics, Tibetan lamas, Mongol warriors, and Persian merchants, all living and interacting within the same imperial system. Marco would spend nearly 20 years in Asia, serving Kublai Khan in various diplomatic and administrative roles, traveling as far as Burma and Tibet, before finally returning home in 1295. When he did, his stories were so fantastical that many of his countrymen and later generations of historians questioned whether he had even been to China at all. But Marco Polo did something few others had ever done. He told the West about the East, and more than that, he made the East irresistible. His account, The Travels of Marco Polo, written while he was imprisoned in Genoa, would become one of the most widely read books in medieval Europe. It described not only trade goods and cities, but beliefs, rituals, architecture, and mythologies, from the assassins of Alamut to the riches of the Great Khan. For many in Europe, it was the first time they had even heard of Cathay, the name Polo used for China. Marco Polo was not the first European to reach China, but he was the first to make it unforgettable. He painted a picture of a connected world, of wealth beyond imagining, and of possibilities. In doing so, he planted a seed, one that would grow centuries later into the ambitions of men like Christopher Columbus. But what was it that made the Silk Road work in the first place? It was not a straight road. It was not controlled by a single power. It crossed through dozens of kingdoms, empires, deserts, and mountain ranges. What allowed it to flourish was empire. Specifically, the presence of relatively stable, powerful empires that could enforce security, negotiate trade rights, and maintain order. The Han Dynasty gave it birth. The Tang Dynasty brought it to maturity, establishing foreign embassies, promoting Buddhism, and even allowing foreign traders to live and settle in Chang'an, one of the largest cities in the world. Century later, the Mongol Empire, stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe, gave the Silk Road its golden age. Under the Pax Mongolica, traders could cross thousands of miles under a single imperial umbrella. Merchants from Genoa, Baghdad, Samarkand, and Xi'an could move with surprising freedom, protected by Mongol law and escorted by imperial guards. This was crucial, because despite its romantic image, the Silk Road was incredibly dangerous. Robbers plagued the passes, sandstorms buried caravan, water sources were scarce, and temperatures swung from desert heat to sub-zero nights. Merchants rarely traveled the entire distance. Instead, the Silk Road functioned through segmented trade goods passed from hand to hand, region to region. A bolt of Chinese silk might be traded in Kashgar, then again in Samarkand, then carried by Persian merchants to Baghdad, and finally sold by Arab traders in Constantinople or Venice. This created not just a network of trade, but a network of middlemen. And with that came opportunity. Cities along the route grew wealthy: Kashgar, Samarkand, Bukhara. Merv, and others became centers of commerce, learning, and diplomacy. Caravanserais fortified inns for traveling merchants, dotted the road at regular intervals, offering food, shelter, and safety. In these hubs, languages mixed, currencies changed hands, and stories traveled faster than any horse. It wasn't just material wealth that flowed. It was knowledge, Chinese papermaking, for instance, found its way westward via the Silk Road. The secret was eventually captured by the Abbasid Caliphate after the Battle of Talis in 751 AD, where Chinese prisoners taught the method to their Arab captors. Paper mills appeared in Samarkand, then Baghdad, then Egypt, and finally Andalusia, from which they entered Christian Europe. Gunpowder, too, moved westward first as a curiosity, then as a military revolution, and in the other direction flowed religions. Buddhism spread from India through Central Asia into China. Manichaeism and Nestorian Christianity reached China as well. Islam moved eastward with the merchants and found converts in the trading cities of Central Asia and Western China. Ideas were the most persistent cargo. They clung to people's minds, survived long after the merchants were gone. But the Silk Road also carries something darker. It is widely believed by historians that the Black Death, the plague that decimated Europe in the mid-14th century, came by way of the Silk Road, originating likely in Central Asia, carried by fleas on rats that traveled in grain sacks or aboard merchant caravans. The disease spread to China, India, the Middle East, and eventually Europe, killing tens of millions. The very network that had linked humanity also helped kill it. And yet, the Silk Road endured for a time. The Silk Road's decline was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual unraveling, the slow fraying of a once mighty thread stretched across continents. By the 15th century, the land route that had connected empires for more than 1,000 years was falling into disuse. It wasn't just banditry or shifting alliances, it was geopolitics. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople, renaming it Istanbul and shutting the gates to many Western traders. What had once been a porous, multicultural bridge between East and West suddenly became a wall. And the Ottomans didn't want to be a middleman. They wanted control. For European kingdoms and city-states, particularly the ambitious merchants of Venice, Genoa, and later Portugal and Spain, this Ottoman monopoly posed an existential threat to their wealth and influence. If the land routes were closed, they would turn to the sea. Thus began the age of exploration. And make no mistake, it was born from the Silk Road's demise. When Vasco da Gama sailed around the Cape of Good Hope to reach India in 1498, it wasn't curiosity that drove him. It was commerce. Silk, spices, porcelain, gems. These goods had once arrived through dusty caravans across Asia. Now, European navigators sought new paths to old markets. In this way, the Silk Road's greatest legacy may be the maritime empires it indirectly created. Columbus, sailing west for a shortcut to Cathay; Magellan, seeking a passage around the southern tip of the Americas. Even the British and Dutch East India companies, chartered to dominate trade with the East, were acting on instincts and ambitions, first shaped by the land-based connections of the Silk Road. But it wasn't only global trade routes that were reshaped. It was global consciousness. For more than a millennium, the Silk Road taught civilizations that the world was bigger and more connected than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just China and Rome, or India and Persia. It was everything in between. The Sogdians, who translated Buddhist sutras into Chinese, the Arab traders who brought Islamic astronomy into Central Asia, the Mongol emperors who tolerated multiple religions and welcomed foreign diplomats. It was syncretism in motion, religion, language, science, fashion, and medicine blending across boundaries that, for centuries, had seemed impenetrable. Even in China, the legacy of the Silk Road shaped imperial outlook. The Tang Dynasty, 600 and 907 AD, which presided over the golden age of Silk Road exchange, became known for its cosmopolitan culture, foreign embassies, traders, and even street performers from far-off lands filled the capital city of Chang'an. The Tang court employed Central Asian musicians. Persian fashions influenced noble attire. Buddhist art evolved under Indian, Tibetan, and Chinese influences, and though later dynasties, such as the Ming, would grow more insular, the memory of international exchange, the sense that China had once been a participant in a wider world, remained. The very name Silk Road was not used in ancient times. It was coined in the 19th century by a German geographer, Ferdinand von Richthofen, who sought to give shape to the idea of East-West commercial exchange. In German, Seidenstrasse, the Silk Road, evoked something elegant, ancient, and vital. But it wasn't only silk, tea, porcelain, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, amber from the Baltic, dates from Mesopotamia, sandalwood from India, paper from China, ivory from Africa all made their way along the route. And more importantly, people did too. Pilgrims walked these paths to reach sacred shrines. Diplomats crossed deserts to negotiate treaties. Nomads traded their livestock for goods that had passed through a dozen hands. Even bandits became part of the system, part of the ecosystem of risk and reward that defined life along the road. Culturally, the Silk Road altered the identities of whole peoples. Consider Buddhism. It began in India, but it flourished in China thanks in large part to the transmission of text, statues, and monks across Central Asia. Cave complexes like those at Dunhuang, filled with painted murals and ancient manuscripts, showed the deep spiritual influence that followed the trade routes. Or consider Islam. Though an Arabian religion, it quickly took root in Central Asian cities and Western China. Even today, China's northwest Xinjiang region is home to large populations of Turkic Muslim peoples, a legacy of the centuries-old mix of traders, scholars, and settlers. Christianity, too, left a mark. Nestorian crosses have been found in far western China, and records from the Tang Dynasty mention churches and Christian communities. Another signal of the cultural richness and religious plurality the road enabled. But perhaps the most powerful legacy of the Silk Road lies not in its physical remnants, not in the coins buried beneath the sands of Samarkand, nor in the faded frescoes of desert monasteries, but in its idea, the idea that civilizations don't exist in isolation, that cultures grow stronger when they touch, that even across vast distances and harsh terrain, people will always seek to connect through trade, through language, through belief. It is a lesson the modern world often forgets. In an era of digital borders and geopolitical tensions, the Silk Road reminds us connection is civilization. There is an irony here. Resting quietly beneath centuries of sand and snow, the Silk Road, a route born of imperial ambition, hardened by desert winds, enriched by countless cultures, no longer truly exists. And yet, it has never stopped shaping our world. Its caravans are gone. Its caravanserais fallen to ruin. The traders who once bartered bolts of silk for handfuls of sapphires have vanished into the echoes of history. But the idea of it, the idea that East and West can be bridged, that knowledge can cross mountains, and that peace might ride in the saddle of commerce endures. In fact, it has returned. Today, modern powers speak of new silk roads, vast infrastructure projects linking China to Europe, Africa, and beyond. Roads, railways, ports, but it is unclear whether these endeavors will foster connection or control, or whether they will revive the spirit of shared exchange or merely mimic its form. Perhaps the true Silk Road cannot be paved, because the most powerful journeys are not measured in miles but in minds changed. In 2014, archaeologists excavated a grave near Xi'an, the ancient capital of the Han and Tang dynasties. Inside it, they found the remains of a Sogdian nobleman, a Zoroastrian from Central Asia, buried in China around the 6th century AD. His tomb bore inscriptions in Chinese and Sogdian. His epitaph told of travels, friendships, negotiations, and loss. He had lived between worlds, never quite of one, never quite of another, and yet he belonged to both. That is the legacy of the Silk Road. Not just in gold or spice, silk or silver, but in the spaces where identities meet, blend, and evolve. It reminds us that empires rise and fall, but the need to connect, to understand, to reach across the unknown that never fades. Even now, if you walk the old paths of Dunhuang, listen to the winds over the Taklamakan desert, or stand among the broken stones of Palmyra, you may feel it, the faint echo of hooves, the hush of traders whispering in dozens of tongues, the scent of jasmine and cinnamon, and you may wonder if they could find a way to speak to each other across such distance with so much at stake. Why can't we?